In May 1992, id Software released a game that changed everything. Yes, some of you may say that Wolfenstein 3D wasn't the first 3D action game. Technically, Hover Tank 3D a year earlier was. Others can say that the game that changed everything wasn't Wolfenstein in 1992. It was Doom in 1993. And both these statements are equally right. Here in Russia, all the guys and girls who could get anywhere near the PC in the 90s shared the same passion over the id Software masterpieces as you guys did. As you already know, PCs were rare here, but any person who could get one, no matter ordinary clerk in his office or some rich person who could afford to have a PC at home, regardless of gender, age and financial status, instantly got stuck with shooting Nazis or demons and couldn't get enough of it. Those who already tried to make money off the video games back then instantly realized, this is it. These are the games that can make you rich. One of them started to make bootleg copies of the games and sell them to computer gamers in Russia when this community started to rapidly extend. Others decided to try to make their own games that were similar to the Western ones, but with Russian coloring. I can't tell you for sure that exactly Wolfenstein and Doom started all the load of cheap Russian wannabe the video game ripoffs, but even if there were something earlier, it was Wolfenstein and Doom who turned this into a long-living tradition that continued for many years. I've already told you about some of the most interesting ones. The Need for Speed gave birth to the Ladder Racing Club in 2006, the Lost Vikings to the anti-drug addiction in 2005. And today it's the time to go way back to the 90s, when all of this presumably started, and take a look at the Russian 3D action set in the very heart of Russia, in the Kremlin itself. Well, to be precise, in the lower part of it. Hello YouTube, my name is Victor, you're watching the Russian Video Game Comrade Show, and today I wanna invite you on a tour through the dungeons of Kremlin. Our story starts in the 80s with two Russian computer enthusiasts, the Razbakov brothers, Alexander and Andrei. Alexander and Andrei started to make games back in the 80s, not for the PC but for the microcalculator Electronica B334. For example, they made a tic-tac-toe game. And you have to keep in mind that these games were a little different from the games we used to call games now. Unfortunately, I don't have a video of the tic-tac-toe game on B334, but using footage from the Russian channel Obzor SM, I can show you the same game on a later MK52 Electronica model. The gameplay is based on the numbers of the cells used to play tic-tac-toe. The only things you'll see on the screen are numbers, so probably it'll be a good idea to have a piece of paper and a pen playing with the machine. You start the game and the calculator shows you number 9. It means the machine wants to make a move in the center of the game field. So if we want to play the upper right cell, we have to input number 3. After the input, machine shows you its next move. And so on. This is the way you play. So if you think that the games for Atari 2600 were pretty basic, hold the Soviet microcalculators games beer. And also keep in mind that in the 80s such a microcalculator cost around 2 monthly salaries of the ordinary person in Soviet Russia. In the 90s, Razbakov brothers got a PC and decided that they want to become Russian John Romero and John Carmack and make a Russian Doom. In 1995, they released a techno demo of their game engine named Old Gold. It was a Wolfenstein 3D style action with only one level in it. I have to state here that, in my opinion, it even looks more like Raven's Heretic than id Software's Wolfenstein 3D. Not only because of the stuff used as a weapon, but also because of the dynamic lights effects and water affecting players' movements. Yes, comparing Old Gold to Heretic and Doom, it really looks outdated. But keep in mind that this was an original engine made in Russia in 1994. And in my opinion, this kind of work could lead to a really interesting outcome if the developers made an effort on the game that was intended to be made with this engine. But it didn't. Later the same year, a game called Dungeons of Kremlin was released. And it sucked. I really don't know how, but Razbakov brothers, or should I call them Gelios Company now, even managed to get a real publisher and release Dungeons of Kremlin on an actual CD. I'm not sure how many CDs with the game were printed, but I assume not much. I have a lot of friends who collect video games. Some of them have a huge Russian big-boxed games collection, and no one of them saw even a jewel-cased Dungeons of Kremlin CD. Nevertheless, there are some scanned pictures of the box art and the CD on the internet, as well as the ISO image of the CD itself, and this means we can dive into the game right now and play it as long as we want. The fun thing here is the size of the ISO image. Remember the story I told you about the Ladder Racing Club game that was distributed on several CDs to sell it more expensive? Well, it seems they weren't the first who came up with this. This ISO image size is almost 400 megs, and if you take a look at the game itself, it doesn't seem to need so much space. There is even no background music in the game that could be stored in CD audio to make the ISO bigger. And if you'll try to archive the ISO with zip or RAR, even using average compression ratio, well, it will shrink into 2.5 megs. I assume they did this in an attempt to prevent pirates distributing their game on the A Lot of Games in One multi-games bootleg CDs that were very popular in Russia in the 90s. But after all, those CDs were the only reason anybody in Russia became aware of the existence of this game. Trying to fool people who make their money fooling people, hoping they are stupid and won't try to archive the game. Smart move! I'm bringing this up only because of the game. If it was a decent game, the fact it was pirated and the developers won't get any money for it is really bad. But anyone who played this game back then would definitely ask for an instant refund for it. And not only because the game itself was boring, monotonous and incomparable to Doom or Wolfenstein, but also because it was like old gold, more like a demo than a game. I have to state here that according to the developers themselves, it's quite hard to find anything about them on the internet, but there was an interview for online magazine Downgrade in 2016. They had only $500 budget, and the publisher wanted the game to be finished in very limited time. Not the best excuse to make a shitty game on one side, but on the other side, they wanted to make games and got an opportunity for a real release. And maybe this was an attempt to make themselves known in the game developer community, make connections and create a really good game later. After all, they were the first Russian developers who made their own 3D action game. And this is something. Spoiler, even if it was, they didn't succeed, as the next game was awful too. And they also say that they didn't get a penny for their game aside those $500, and don't even know how many copies the publisher has sold. But even considering all above, they made a video game. And there already were other games out on the market, and the consumer had to decide which one he would pay for. So all the excuses can't work here. No offense, just video games history. Wolfenstein 3D had 6 episodes containing 10 levels each. Dungeons of Kremlin had 3. 3 levels. And let's be honest, in 1995 you could choose from Hexen, Descent or Magic Carpet 2. Would you really buy this instead of any of the games above when you saw its screenshots on the back of the CD in the store? I've just realized that maybe this was the reason Dungeons of Kremlin's successor Smuta, Russian for Turmoil, didn't have a single screenshot on the back of its CD box. Sorry, it's a little early for this. When we run the game, we see a Doom-styled one-screen plot summary, telling us that there were archaeological excavations carried out under the Kremlin. Archaeologists encountered the evil there, and blah blah, it's time to save the world from eternal evil. Maybe Stranger Things Season 3 took place not in the cellar of the American Mall, but in the Dungeons of Kremlin, and wait a minute. Dungeons of Kremlin was released in 1995. Stranger Things Season 3 takes part in the 80s. Could it be that it wasn't finished back then, and the other portal to the Upside Down opened in the Dungeons of Kremlin in the 90s? If it's so, it would explain so much. At least where all the shitty Russian games of the 90s came from. And here we go. These are the dungeons of Kremlin. I won't even joke about the grass on the dungeon's floors. These rooms seem to be ancient, and maybe this is just moss. We are not welcomed here by the bats, fire-blasting demons, zombie ex-wilders, and flying Baba Yaga Russian folklore monsters. All 4 types of enemies here are supposed to be fought with, oh my god, 2 types of weapons. A blaster and an old rifle. 2 fun things here are they both use the same type of ammo despite they look different in the HUD, and the old rifle is more powerful than the futuristic blaster. Makes you think, doesn't it? Oh, and I have to mention the greatest invention of this game. The items that will be scattered through the dungeons. Besides familiar FPS games healing items and bullets, this game also has shrooms and booze in it. The only thing they do is lower your health. Your character, by the way, seems already a little high at the start, so sometimes with inertial controls of the game, it takes time for the character to stop moving after you stop pressing the directional button, and it's a little hard to avoid such bad items. But not as hard as in the sequel. We'll get to it in a minute. And basically that's it. You have to beat 3 levels, at least they look slightly different. And there are no bosses or even at least something interesting in them to tell more about. Well, except your character's catchphrases. They appear in a text box in the corner of the screen after a successful murder of an enemy. For example, after you kill a Baba Yaga, he says, "So long, Granny." And after killing a bat or a demon, bang, one more bigot down. I assume this had to be pronounced Duke Nukem style, but due to the technical and space restrictions, they had an entire CD for the game, and they didn't even make a slight voiceover. What the fuck? Bam! One more bigot down. Huh? How's that? The walkthrough will take you approx 30 to 40 minutes, and that's Russian Doom Dungeons of Kremlin from 1995. As I've already told you, the only reason a lot of us kids in the 90s who had a PC played this were pirated multi-game CDs that included Dungeons of Kremlin, among other really good 3D action games on it. And maybe these CDs were also the reason Razbakov brothers decided to make a sequel of the game. And you know, actually they had 2 sequels to this nightmare. Yes, I'm showing them, for sure. Smuta, the first sequel, was released a year later in 1996. In my opinion, the most interesting thing here is not only the game had a real big box release, never saw this one out in the wilds either, but you can see it on the photo dated 1997 provided by the Razbakov brothers for the same interview in the Downgrade magazine. But it was also promoted on Russian TV. I've already told you that we almost didn't have ordinary video game commercials on TV, but we had a lot of TV shows on the computers and computer games, and Smuta was shown in one of them. And I'm sure it wasn't cheap for the publisher to make this happen. Still, Smuta wasn't as known by the gamers as Dungeons of Kremlin was. And I think the reason is even pirates didn't want to make bootleg copies of it, when they could make illegal copies of the first Quake instead. In Smuta there is no Kremlin anymore. This time you have to go to the secret World War II lab, hidden for 50 years in the outskirts of Moscow. You play as the last living Navi from the group sent to check it out, as all your comrades were instantly killed by the monsters in the lab. Your goal is to stop the madness inside, so it won't break out and kill everyone outside. I won't complain about the plot. After all, most of the western shooters of the 90s also lacked it. We played Wolfenstein, Doom and Quake not to get amused with the plot. We played them for the gameplay itself. And gameplay in Smuta sucked. If you thought Old Gold seemed like heretic, first level of Smuta looks like it tries to be Hexen. Yes, because of the X. Smuta was made using the new original engine, and it looks really better than Dungeons of Kremlin, but still, compared to any western 3D action from the 96 and earlier, it still looks like a cheap imitation. All the rooms in the game looks almost the same, everything except enemy slug details, and overall you'll be instantly bored with the game after 10 to 15 minutes of playing it. Enemies here are all new and the game even has bosses in it. Finally. But don't be too encouraged with this fact, as bosses are the same ordinary enemies but bigger and tougher. Weapons are also updated. Now you have throwing axes, gun, machine gun, magic stuff and the melee axe you start the game with. By the way, do you remember the main Russian 3D action invention in the dungeons of Kremlin? Here is the new one. How do you like a melee weapon with limited bullets? And yes, if you wondered, shrooms and booze are still here too. Now in even more dangerous way, as some of the enemies leave the debuffs after their death on the ground, and you have to move through the level carefully to avoid them. Smoother has 10 levels in it, so this time the game doesn't look like a demo. But to be honest, it better did, as it is so boring that you'll probably drop your walkthrough really fast. But somehow the second bad game from the developer didn't stop the publishers from wanting more. And next year, in 1997, another new game from Razbakov brothers was announced. Announced by a really well-known Russian publisher, Akela, the guys who released Sea Dogs and Pirates of the Caribbean, the games that were even sold in the Western market. Don't even ask me, I have no idea how this happened. A new masterpiece named Kreitz was scheduled to be released in 1998. It was going to be another 3D action, but this time in full 3D. There is almost no information on the game, just several screenshots in the internet and an article about the upcoming game in the Russian video games magazine Video Games World Navigator. But even looking at the screenshots, you can understand that this was going to be another AAA Russian shooter for its time. Half-Life, Blood 2, Thief the Duck Project. I think you can instantly understand that all of these games didn't stand a chance against Kreitz if the game was released back then. But unfortunately, the economic crisis of 1998 prevented Kreitz from being released. And it's a shame. The Razbakov brothers still have the demo of Kreitz, but they don't want to release it in any way, even considering the interest of Russian retro gamers in it. I think they figured something out. In 1999, they made their last attempt in conquering the video game business one more time. The Raising Dead game was released digitally by themselves on their website. And considering it was just a smooth as reskin in the new locations, you can figure out the result yourself. The most fun thing here, they didn't even make a Russian version of the game. It was only in English, and I assume they've tried to sell it only in the West. In 1999, LOL. The outcome was definitely predictable. The Razbakov brothers video game studio Gelios was done. And for the next 16 years they made screensavers. The passion for video games? Guys, I really try to pay some respect for the persons who made the first Russian 3D action, but considering all the facts and the developers' reluctant responses in the interview from 2015, they just wanted to make some money and not a decent video game. So the passion for something forced them to make a sudden comeback in 2016 with the Old Gold 3D game for the Android devices. This game has nothing in common with the original Old Gold, Dungeons of Kremlin, Smuta or Raising Dead. It's just an ordinary mobile phone first-person action game. And for the first time in Gelios history, it even isn't that bad. Decent mobile game gameplay, standard graphics, fair donate that isn't really necessary for completing the game. In 2017, there also was a release of the game named Dungeons of Kremlin Remastered in Steam. But it seems that Gelios has nothing to do with it, and if you take a closer look at the game, you'll instantly recognize it's a completely different game. So I don't think it's worth talking about it more. I understand that shitty games might not be the best thing to talk about in a video. Maybe it would be much more interesting to talk about something really worse, like the Crow game or the Treasure Island game I've already shown you in the videos on the channel. But the truth is, we didn't really have a lot of good games made in Russia, but there were more than enough bad ones. Yes, we also played mostly Western games like you did, but Western bloggers will tell you about such games and perhaps given my English much more interesting than I can do. But Russian games, both good and bad, are still little known to the retro gamers outside of Russia, and not only did they exist, some of us even played them a lot. They may not be as good as the Western ones, but they are also a video game history worth telling about. And I really like telling about video games history. I don't know about you, but I'm always very interested to hear about something previously unknown to me on my favorite topic. Thank you for watching today's episode. I really hope you liked it. Please press thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Have a nice day, good luck!